Having completed my book, The Great Deception on the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of 1974, I was interested to see what kind of feedback we would get and stuff and so on, and I'm really amazed that some of the most obvious questions remain unanswered in terms of the follow-up from Dublin investigations and review, and the fact that Dublin has taken the decision strategically, it would appear, to hand over the responsibility to an agency outside the country, the so-called Operation Denton. And however, in that context, Miriam O'Callaghan, RTE journalist, a well-known personality, interviewed Commissioner Drew Harris in September of 2018, and it's very, very interesting to see how Mr. Harris describes his competencies in 2012 when he was being interviewed in connection with the SMITHWICK Tribunal. And you will see very shortly the long and wide and extensive competencies that he had in Northern Ireland for legacy matters, for terrorism, for liaison with the MI5, with the security services, a really major brief. And one is invited then looking at and listening to the questions posed by Miriam as how he has responded in his role as Commissioner of the Guards and what has happened to all of this information that he has conducted. You will probably see that as far as Mr. Harris is concerned, he doesn't really have a whole lot to offer, or if he has, it's a matter for the Police Service of Northern Ireland to deal with it, even though that the crimes of 1974 Dublin and Monaghan bombings happened within his area of responsibility now and clearly do not belong to be investigated or reviewed by anyone else other than the Commissioner of the Garda Síochána. So let's see as he outlines for us the responsibilities that he had way back in 2012. The first sentence says it all. I had major responsibilities in respect of what's known as legacy matters. Also talks about the 3,260 deaths which are required to be investigated. And he also deals with some 147 murders that happened since 1998, and he talks about all of the other serious matters like serious crime and so on. And as he goes on, well, there's a huge amount of work in terms of reviewing old material, but also then conducting investigations of the moment. My investigation teams would spend approximately 50% of their time on investigations which could be termed as legacy. Again, the same theme, his responsibility for legacy matters in Northern Ireland, which of course is very appropriate in the context of our current discussion on the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. Now we come to the nub of the matter in relation to his background. Well, I have overall responsibility for intelligence within the police services of Northern Ireland. One intelligence system exists which copes with all intelligence, including crime and national security intelligence. But I'm also responsible for the interface with the security service, that's MI5. The security service have a primacy in respect of national security intelligence, but just to flesh out some of those nuances, and as we'll see in a moment, that this is an extraordinarily important part of his brief, the interaction with the intelligence services and his knowledge of what is happening and his link to them. Now, bearing in mind that Mr. Harris is responsible for the Garda Síochána, which has responsibility for policing and security in this state. This is one of the conflict of interest scenarios that obviously may never have been explored with him on his way into his current responsibility, because he says this: I also am responsible then for all covert operations relating to national security and crime and the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and as the senior responsible officer I am also responsible then for the majority of the covert intelligence sources who will report in respect of national security matters. Clearly there is an obvious conflict when it comes to having someone who is directly and immediately concerned with the policing and security services of an adjoining state, albeit more than often not a friendly state. No other country would accept that kind of proposition in terms of looking after their own domestic interests in relation to policing and security. When one speaks about the Troubles, it's often Different incidents, particularly horrific ones like the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, Loughlin Island shooting, Oma bombings come to mind. But here's a short, definitive bit of information which was put on the record way back in 2015 by Raymond White, former Assistant Chief Constable of the RUC, and he just gives us very simple, straightforward and stark information. 3,500 people killed, 47,000 people injured, 36,000 odd shooting incidents, 16,000 bombing incidents. Now that is by no stretch of the imagination normal policing by any means, and it required a robust intelligence gathering response. Did we get it right all the time? Definitely not. Well, there are officers within the military and within the police who were rogues in the sense that they signed up with the paramilitaries. Definitely so. Mr. White also goes on to say that he didn't think, or he doesn't believe, that that kind of activity was systemic in Northern Ireland. But clearly that is the kind of situation and the experience that police officers had in command positions. Very different to the policing by consent model in Southern Ireland. The paramilitary system that they were forced to adopt was one that had to deal with those kind of situations, and that was certainly no easy task. On the 9th of September 2018, RTE broadcast an interview that Miriam O'Callaghan had undertaken with Commissioner Drew Harris a few days previously following his appointment as the new Commissioner of the Garda Síochána. Now, the interview itself, very interesting, runs for about a half an hour, covers many different topics including his background, his current aspirations and his hopes for the future and his opinion of the Garda Síochána and so on. But for the purpose of this rather short video, three questions jump off the page, worthy of discussion and indeed examination. And he was asked, how do you square your allegiance, bearing in mind the two different jurisdictions? His answer is a non-answer. He describes in some detail the technical differences between the oaths of office in the PSNI and in the Garda Síochána, but he doesn't deal with the specific question of allegiance. And of course, obviously the intent of the question is, if you are somebody that's bound by the British Official Secrets Act, how can you share your information in this jurisdiction with the police force that you now command, who legitimately have an interest in the information that you have, bearing in mind your previous vast experience in that area? His answer is, in my respectful opinion, a non-answer. Similarly, unto it's an extension of the same, can you share your information from Northern Ireland? And again, you can listen to his answer, which is basically a no. In relation to Dublin and Monaghan bombings, he's advised that victims are asking questions, are looking for reasons why, they want to explore the issues of collusion and all of the ancillary matters in relation to the horrific crimes of the 17th of May 1974, 34 people murdered between Dublin and Monaghan, single biggest atrocity in the history of the Trouble. And again, having ran through that, it is clear that Mr. Harris does not feel that he has any information that can offer a unique view on that, or if he has, that remains the responsibility of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Now, clearly and absolutely that is incorrect, because the crimes happened in the Republic, and by any definition, and the simplest of definitions, it becomes his responsibility and that of the Garda Síochána, and of course by extension to the government of the Republic in terms of following up on either a review or an investigation of those killings.
How do you square your allegiances, though? Because you swore allegiance to the PSNI, and then you swore allegiance the other day to the Garda Síochána. How do you square those allegiances? Which trumps the other?
The two oaths are somewhat different. PSNI attestation is one around upholding the law, upholding the European Convention on Human Rights, and very much puts the prominence of the rule of law and democracy to the fore. It makes no mention, actually, of the United Kingdom, and so it's a different oath from the one I took on Sunday night, which is to uphold the Constitution there. So the two things are not in parallel, if I might say that in the first place. Secondly then, as I was asked earlier in the week, I am Irish. It seems I'm not in here. It seems very natural to be working here and providing my service and my time and effort into protecting, in effect, the people of Ireland and doing good on the island of Ireland as well.
What's interesting though is that you probably have loads of information, just decades of built up intelligence. So if you're sitting in a meeting now with senior Gardaí, are you going to tell them everything you know?
I would think practically, I can't actually envisage a situation where I'm going to be sitting thinking, oh, there's something I know that they don't know. Now, I know an awful lot of what happened in Northern Ireland, a different jurisdiction, obviously, and so I may be able to fill in when they're talking about some event, oh, this happened or that happened, but genuinely, the responsibilities that fall upon me now as Commissioner, I practically find it difficult to think what this scenario is going to be. A lot of what is held secret is around the methodology about how you might go around all elements of covert policing, not only just around terrorism but also around major crime investigation. But that methodology would be the same here. I'd be telling them what they already know and do because I've worked closely in partnership and with them over the years, and I'm now their Commissioner and I know how they work.
And I suppose in a similar vein, the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, the victims there feel they've never got justice. They again speak of collusion, a lack of cooperation. I mean, you're now in the position, I suppose, Commissioner, they feel that you could help them. I mean, is there information you have through your decades being in the Northern Irish Police Service that you could provide, you could hand over that would help them?
I need to speak to the general point around this, and the general point is, if we had information which suggested wrongdoing, as I said, that would have been required of the Police Ombudsman. The overarching duty to prevent and detect crime also remained, and if we had information which pertained to atrocities or crime here in the rest of Ireland, then we were also bound to share that. But there's also an obligation now on Garda Síochána with those investigations, keep them open and see what the possibility is of what might happen in the future around those should new information or new intelligence come to light.
So in terms of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, do you have files or information regarding the perpetrators of those murders? That's what some of the victims were asking.
No, and what information now would lie with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and then it's for them to deal with that appropriately. But I can give them an assurance that the accountability regime and how the Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Chief Constable approach this is to ensure the highest standards of behaviour and compliance with the law.
In the context of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of 1974, the past and the present collide quite markedly for a number of reasons. Obviously, this year, the 17th of May 1974, was the 50th anniversary of the bombings. When I was writing my book on the bombings, called The Great Deception, it was very interesting to get the reaction from, I guess, the younger age groups, because they, in many cases, had no idea of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. It was like something in the dim and distant past. But part of my research has indicated to me, of course, that while it is historically in the past, it is very much in the present for a number of years. And this is where the events of 50 years ago collide with the present, because now the British police have something called Operation Denton, and this is a case where the PSNI were forced to take a review of the activities of the Denton gang, the loyalist killers in the north, and by extension, and possibly a tenuous extension, it is alleged by some that that also contains reference to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. Personally, I think this is a misnomer, because Dublin and Monaghan quite clearly in the Republic and should of course be investigated by the authorities in the Republic and not by the North. That doesn't mean to say that cooperation shouldn't and must take place in that context, but it is clearly a crime or crimes committed in the Republic, and then by any definition it should be investigated by the authorities in the Republic and not anywhere else, and certainly not be seen as allegedly a part of Operation Denton. a review undertaken under the order of a court in Belfast as distinct from a voluntary exercise conducted by the PSNI or any other British agency. There is a dichotomy in the position of the Irish government in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, because they appear to be quite satisfied to allow Operation Denton to do the so-called heavy lifting in relation to it, and indeed have, in some cases, through its representatives, made approving noises in relation to Operation Denton, which of course is a flawed exercise for the reason that I have mentioned. Also, in dealing with the British every year, and this year was no exception, an appeal was made for the British government to release to the Irish government their files in relation to Dublin and Monaghan. And then, to add another tier to the fraught relationships in relation to legacy events, the Irish government intend to take the British government to the European Court in relation to the legitimacy of the British so-called Legacy Act. And I think, as demonstrated in the previous RUC PSNI experience of the current GARDA Commissioner, is he is one who possesses very detailed legacy information concerning the Troubles, probably the most comprehensive set of information. Now, it would appear, for a number of reasons, but maybe particularly because of the stipulations of the British Official Secrets Act, that he seems unwilling to share that information with any review in his current policing jurisdiction, which seems quite amazing. Repeatedly he says in answer to the questions, well, that's a matter for the PSNI. Of course it is not a matter for the PSNI, it is a matter for the Garda Síochána, and clearly any review, any investigation should be conducted by the Garda Síochána in that regard. It is clear that in the interest of the victims and their families and the survivors, it is clear that the Dublin government should take belated action in ordering an investigation or a review into the Dublin and Monaghan bombings by the Garda Commissioner, and for that reason that should be a domestic review, clearly cooperating with the authorities in Northern Ireland insofar as information is required from there. But this should be a review undertaken by Dublin, and it should be undertaken by the Garda Síochána in the first instance. It may well be, of course, that the current Commissioner, because of his obligations, in inverted commas, to the British Official Secrets Act, would be unable to share the information that he undoubtedly has, and that of course produces a very clear conflict of interest, which cannot be resolved, by placebo words or whatever. It clearly, if the information exists, the head of our domestic policing organisation on Garda Síochána should A, lead the investigation, and B, provide all of the information he has in his possession to such an inquiry, and then let's see where the pieces fall following from that. And of course, this is a matter that should be respectful of the victims, their families, and their relatives. But of course, the wider Irish national interest in the Republic would be served only by that kind of approach, and not by abdicating responsibility to another police force. No other country would do it. No other country would adopt this handoff policy